the subject of government regulation. I believe this illustrates the issue of differences in attitude that you can get in the general and in the specific case. And it's just using this, well, what worries you more? Too much regulation of business or government or not enough? And a majority, a clear majority, say they're worried about too much government regulation rather than not enough. Another question, which of the following do you agree with? The government should become more involved in regulating and controlling business or less involved? And by about a 2-to-1 margin, people are saying the government should be less involved in regulation. All right, that's a general attitude. Now let's take this down to a specific case. Before we get there, how would this be characterized here? These two findings? Go back here. Well, less government regulation, right? The Gallup headlines on the Gallup poll was Americans leery of too much government regulation of business. That's the headline. All right, separate and very specific questions. To avoid more taxpayer bailouts, which of the following do you think is the better course? Should we break up the banks? No, not very many. Should we have stricter regulation, 52%? Allow large banks to fail, 50%. So now by almost 2-to-1, people in the specific are saying, well, we need more regulation. I want to suggest I don't think that is a contradictory attitude. We can have the general predisposition can be perfectly reasonable, but people are looking at a specific case and saying, well, but in this case, we obviously need it. Look what happened. Look what it cost us. This is a group out of control. It's costing us a fortune. I want to suggest that's not what I would call a contradiction. It says people have generalized dispositions towards one thing or another. Hit with a specific set of facts, it doesn't have to correspond. The only place where it corresponds is in the case of true ideologues. An ideologue who believes something as a matter of principle, like I believe in less government regulation, and don't confuse me with the facts about a particular situation, I'm against regulation as a matter of principle. Most people are far more pragmatic. They say, and we do know that as a philosophical point, a majority are saying we like less government regulation. But show me a case that calls for it, and I'll express a different opinion. Again, I come back to the question, which of these is correct? This is good advice, because that's my mother. Listen to your mother. And that's what I think a lot of this is about. If you're going to evaluate a poll, the number one thing to look at is what is the question that was asked, and say, all right, forget the headline. The headline's almost always wrong. This is what people said when they were asked this specific question. Then you ask yourself, well, what would they have said if they'd asked the question differently? Ideally, in a good report, you'll find that. In most news reports, unfortunately, you won't, because most news media have the need to simplify things down to a basic level. The answer to any single question is almost always incomplete. The exception is where there's not a whole lot of issue about who you were. Remember the first one we dealt with? Who are you going to vote for, McCain or Obama? That's pretty direct, okay? There's not a whole lot of misunderstanding about what that's about. You couldn't, any change you made to the wording, as long as you got the same two candidates and you haven't done something to totally distort it, and it's close enough to the election that people have thought about it and made up their mind, that's not going to change a whole lot. But the other kind of issues that I'm talking about here, they will. Look at some of the elements of this question. Well, what are bad elements? Implicit or explicitly? Bureaucrats are bad, okay? Public servants are good, by the way. Regulation control is bad. Bailout is really bad. Taxpayer bailout is even worse, right? What's the norm that's appealing to less government regulation? Freedom. So words that are in part of a question explicitly can have power, but even implicit, the word freedom wasn't there. But I think that was underlying, well, government regulation is an imposition on freedom. Therefore, my generalized disposition As Americans, we believe in freedom. So you say government regulation, my instinctive reaction is negative. But as we saw, unless you can present a compelling reason why, in this case, I should think differently about that.